This is Linda Favela, Jeremiah 34. 2 chapters ago, the king didn't like Jeremiah's prophecy and confined him to the court of the guard. Now we're backing up in time a little bit to the delivery of the prophecy and why Yahweh made it so final and harsh. Verse 1. The word which came to Jeremiah from Yahweh when Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, with all his army, all the kingdoms of the earth that were under his dominion, and all the peoples, were fighting against Jerusalem and against all its cities, saying, comment in verse 1, Nebuchadnezzar was overrunning Judah with his army and all the armies of all the kingdoms in his domain. At present they're engaged at Jerusalem and some of the other fortified cities. It was then that Yahweh gave Jeremiah this horrendous word. Zedekiah locked him up for it. We already heard the word 2 chapters ago in Jeremiah 32, 3-5. Backing up to the time Jeremiah gave it, this is how it went down. Yahweh said to him, verse 2, Yahweh the God of Israel says, Go and speak to Zedekiah king of Judah, and tell him, Yahweh says, Behold, I'll give this city into the hand of the king of Babylon, and he will burn it with fire. You won't escape out of his hand, but will surely be taken and delivered into his hand. Your eyes will see the eyes of the king of Babylon, and he'll speak with you mouth to mouth. You'll go to Babylon. Comment in verses 2 and 3, it's no wonder Zedekiah didn't like the word. Yahweh has given the city to Nebuchadnezzar to be burned. Zedekiah will not escape. He'll see Nebuchadnezzar face to face, speak with him mouth to mouth, and be carried away to Babylon. The word goes on, verse 4. Yet hear Yahweh's word, O Zedekiah, king of Judah. Yahweh says concerning you, you won't die by the sword, you'll die in peace, and with the burnings of your fathers, the former kings who were before you, so that they'll make a burning for you. They'll lament you and say, Ah, Lord, for I've spoken this word, says Yahweh. Comment, about a decade before Nebuchadnezzar took King Jehoiakim during the second siege, Jeremiah said Jehoiakim would die without honor, have a burial fit for a donkey, and not be lamented even by his family, Jeremiah 22, 18 and 19. Zedekiah will have it a little better in verses 4 and 5. He won't die a violent death. He'll die in peace. He'll have the burnings of his fathers, which means there'll be honorary fires to mourn his passing, according to the custom for Judah's previous kings, 2 Chronicles 16:14 and 2 Chronicles 21:19. Still, he'll be taken captive. He'll see Nebuchadnezzar face to face, and from information coming later in the book, he'll look on as his sons are executed. That'll be the last thing he sees, because Nebuchadnezzar will put his eyes out and take him to Babylon, which is where we assume he'll be when, according to Jeremiah just now, he'll die a peaceful death of natural causes and receive at least some honor. Maybe for the rest of his life, without his eyes to entertain him, he'll contemplate how it might have been different if he had listened to Yahweh. After this word of defeat, burning of the city, and captivity, verse 6. Then Jeremiah the prophet spoke all these words to Zedekiah, king of Judah, in Jerusalem, when the king of Babylon's army was fighting against Jerusalem and against all the cities of Judah that were left, against Lachish and against Azekah, for these alone remained of the cities of Judah as fortified cities. Comment, all Judah is defeated except the fortified cities Jerusalem, Lachish, and Azekah. But what was the sin that triggered Yahweh to seal Judah's fate and Zedekiah's fate? Verse 8. The word came to Jeremiah from Yahweh after King Zedekiah had made a covenant with all the people who were at Jerusalem to proclaim liberty to them, that every man should let his male servant and every man his female servant, who is a Hebrew or a Hebrewess, go free, that no one should make bondservants of them, of a Jew his brother. All the princes and all the people obeyed who had entered into the covenant, that everyone should let his male servant and everyone his female servant go free, that no one should make bondservants of them any more. They obeyed and let them go. But afterwards they turned and caused the servants and the handmaids, whom they had let go free, to return, and brought them into subjection for servants and for handmaids. Comment, Yahweh's law was that a Hebrew servant should be released after 6 years, sometime during the 7th year, Exodus 21:2. Apparently Judah was ignoring that law along with the rest of the law. They've been keeping the Hebrew servants indefinitely. In verses 8 to 10, Zedekiah called on all the people of Jerusalem to do the right thing and release their servants. He might have been motivated by practical purposes, that he would somehow be able to mount a better defense of the city if the servants were free. Or it might have been for evil purposes, so their masters didn't have to feed them during the famine. Or it might have been out of fear of Yahweh, or some combination of those. Anyhow, he and the leading men entered a covenant, which means they solemnly swore to release their servants. But in verse 11, they reversed themselves and subjugated their servants again because of this treachery. Verse 12. Therefore Yahweh's word came to Jeremiah from Yahweh, saying, Yahweh, the God of Israel, says, I made a covenant with your fathers in the day that I brought them out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage, saying, At the end of 7 years every man of you shall release his brother who is a Hebrew, who has been sold to you and has served you 6 years. You shall let him go free from you. Comment in verses 12 to 14, the Israelites were in bondage in Egypt. Yahweh delivered them from Egypt, and they agreed to abide by the law of Moses, Exodus 24:3. The law was straight from Yahweh and stipulated that they should release their Hebrew servants after 6 years of service at most. The Israelites understood how right this was because they were all former slaves themselves. Yahweh released them to be released, not to be resubjected. So their ancestors agreed to abide by the law, including the terms of servitude. But Yahweh says in verse 14, But your fathers didn't listen to me and didn't incline their ear. You had now turned and had done that which was right in my eyes, in every man proclaiming liberty to his neighbor. You had made a covenant before me in the house which is called by my name. Comment in verse 15, recently they did right. They entered a formal covenant to release their Hebrew servants. They executed it before Yahweh at the temple, at the house called by his name. Yahweh didn't call it my house because he's not particularly inhabiting the place anymore. 2 Chronicles 7:20. He only called it the house called by my name, as in they falsely assume it's his house, but he's turned his face away from it. Anyway, they solemnly proclaimed liberty to the captives there, and verse 16. But you turned and profaned my name, and every man caused his servant, and every man his handmaid, whom you had let go free at their pleasure, to return. You brought them into subjection to be to you for servants and for handmaids. Therefore Yahweh says, You have not listened to me to proclaim liberty, every man to his brother and every man to his neighbor. Comment, they didn't honor the covenant. This would be wrong under any system of ethics, but especially in the law of Moses. Quote, When you vow a vow to Yahweh your God, you shall not be slack to pay it, for Yahweh your God will surely require it of you. You shall observe and do that which has gone out of your lips. Deuteronomy 21:21-23. Because they treated Yahweh with such disrespect and ignoring the old covenant and the recent one they had made of their own initiative, Yahweh says, still in verse 17, Behold, I proclaim to you a liberty, says Yahweh, to the sword, to the pestilence, and to the famine. I'll make you be tossed back and forth among all the kingdoms of the earth. Comment, Yahweh says, I'm your master, but because of my anger, I hereby release you to the sword, pestilence, famine, and to be tossed back and forth in all the kingdoms of the earth. Verse 18. I'll give the men who have transgressed my covenant, who have not performed the words of the covenant which they made before me, when they cut the calf in two and passed between its parts, the princes of Judah, the princes of Jerusalem, the eunuchs, the priests, and all the people of the land, who passed between the parts of the calf, I'll even give them into the hand of their enemies and into the hand of those who seek their life. Comment, sometimes when they wanted to emphasize the solemn nature of a covenant, they cut an animal in parts and walked between the pieces, Genesis 15:10. It was something like saying, May I be cut apart like this if I don't fulfill my word. In verses 18 and 19, people from every walk of life passed between the parts of the calf to indicate they would keep the covenant to release the servants. In verse 20, Yahweh will give them to their enemies who seek their life. Speaking of those who broke the covenant, still in verse 20, their dead bodies will be food for the birds of the sky and for the animals of the earth. I'll give Zedekiah, king of Judah, and his princes into the hand of their enemies, into the hands of those who seek their life, and into the hands of the king of Babylon's army, who has gone away from you. Comment in verse 21, the episode of releasing the servants and taking them back was so perverted in Yahweh's eyes that he couldn't stand it anymore. It's even hard to explain all the ways it was wrong. So Yahweh sealed Zedekiah's fate and Jerusalem's fate. The situation will descend into the worst case scenario. For the moment, in verse 21, the Babylonian army has gone away, probably to deal with the Egyptians, Jeremiah 37:5. But verse 22, behold, I will command, says Yahweh, and cause them to return to this city. They will fight against it, take it, and burn it with fire. I'll make the cities of Judah a desolation without inhabitant. Comment in verse 22, the Babylonian army will be back to finish what they started. Yahweh will see to it. Jeremiah 35 is next.